Today's lesson is about graphing sine x, cos x, and later on tan x, which is a whole nother animal when we get to tan x. So two-part video here. The first part of the video is going to help you do sine and cos, and then I got to switch over to a different kind of technology to try to help you with the tan graph. To explore sine and cos at a very rudimentary level, all we're going to do is essentially make a table of values and just see what the shapes of these things come out to. So let me just start these instructions. This is the activity you're to do today. Print this note out, follow along with me the first few steps, and then finish the rest of it. It says use the following axis to sketch the graphs of y equals sine using degrees. So we're going to go back to degrees first of all to get started here. It says use 30 degrees on the x-axis. You do not need to label every tick, but be sure to label all of the multiples of 90. And what they mean by that is the scale here is going to be 30s, but we might not write in every single line because things will get too jammed up. So I'm going to make sure I'm in the smallest pen I can here, and I'm going to try and zoom this in a little bit to really. So this will be a 90, 120, 150, that's 180. And then continue on like that. Okay, so on every third line, you're going 90 degrees. Because if you try and write 30 on every single line, it's just going to get too jammed up. Then I'm going to use my calculator to evaluate sine at all of these different values. Now I got to check I'm in the right mode here. I can see from yesterday's work I was in radian mode. So I'm just going to switch over right now in my setup menu over to degrees, back to degrees, like for grade 10, 11. And I'm just going to type in sine of 0. And sine of 0 is 0. So I'm going to put that on my graph right there. Oh, and just to open things up a little bit, I'm going to use 1 and -1. Oh, it does say that in the directions. Use increments of 0.5 on the y-axis there. And the next point I'm going to do is the first one that's on the next tick there, which is 30, which isn't written on my titles there, but that's what I'm going to use. And I'm going to go sine of 30, and I get 1/2 or 0.5. So I'm going to put that on the graph. I'm going to do the next one, sine of 60. I get √3/2. That's not going to help me to graph it, √3/2 on my calculator. So I hit that SD button, or maybe FD button, whatever button you've got to get it to decimal. Or maybe you got decimal right off the hop. And I get 0.866 right about there. And then I'm going to do sine of 90, and I get a value of 1. So I hope you can now do the rest of it. Fill in all that scale all the way along, all those degrees, punch them all in, and build the whole sine graph. Do the same thing for cosine. Then when you get down to the next part, it says make the switch to radians. We're doing the exact same thing. It's just read the instructions a little bit different here. It says use increments of pi/6 on the x-axis. You do not need to label every tick, but be sure to label the multiples of pi/2. Well, I am going to label every tick. You don't have to, but just watch what I do so you understand what happens with pi/6 here. This first line is pi/6. The next one would be 2 pi/6, but I don't write 2 pi/6. I reduce that fraction. The next one's going to be pi/3. And then the next one is 3 pi/6, which when it's reduced is pi/2. And that's what they're talking about, is that every 3 squares here is a pi/2. So then pi/2, this one would be 2 pi/2, which is pi. Then 1, 2, 3, 3 pi/2. And then this one here would be 4 pi/2, which is 2 pi, okay? So I didn't write them all in there, but it might be helpful to have them in there as you're punching these in. And you're going to see something happen almost immediately, and you're going to get the idea here very quickly. But try typing a few of those in, just like you did it on the previous one. So for instance, I'm going to type in sine of 0. Well, sine of 0 is still 0. Then I'm going to switch my calculator over to radian mode. So I'm in radian mode there, and I'm going to go sine of pi/6. And I hope there's a big learning moment here as soon as I type in sine of pi/6. As far as the value I'm going to get there, sine of pi/6. And when I type that in, I get, 1/2. There's my 1 and -1 again. So you might have to write a few more of these in here so you know what to type in for each of those. But really try to do those fractions in your head. to really be good at radians, you got to be sort of good at those basic fractions that you saw me do here to get these ones. Okay, and then continue on and make beautiful graphs. Then you can check your graphs on any online graphing program to make sure that your graphs are perfect. So something like maybe Desmos. There's a website called www.desmos.com. It's a great one to play around with. It's also a free app available, and you can use that to check your graphs. So this video, specifically to do sine or cos, once you've built the graphs, then you can answer all these questions, and that's all you have to do today is answer those questions for sine and cos. Now, when you finish that, make sure you finished all that. Then go to watch the video for tan. What I've written here for all the stuff for tan might be hard to follow if you haven't watched the video first. So watch the video, which is sort of an intro to this, and then you'll come back and read this. Last thing I want to say about today's lesson, I don't want you to stress about the graphs of sine, cos, and tan. I really want to explain them to you so you understand where they come from. But in the end, in this course, if you just, when this is done, memorize the graphs of sine, cos, and tan, that'll be good enough for this grade. It's not as good as it could be. We really want to understand where these things come from, but it's okay if some of this gets a little too tricky for you and you're stuck with memorizing the graphs. That's actually okay for this course. That'll be fine. But do your best to follow along all these presentations we're giving on the graphs so that you get them as best as you can. Okay, so do those graphs, print those out, make them beautiful, answer those questions, and then watch the tan video to see how to get you started on how to do the tan graph.